Let's just start with something really simple. How many senses do you think we have?
5. I can smell, I can touch, I can hear, I can see. Is it 5 that yeah, 5. Isn't it 5?
Have you heard of a sixth sense?
Being able to see ghosts and stuff.
Okay, so I think most people would agree that we have 5 senses. And some people would say, isn't there something like a sixth sense? And I don't think it's agreed what that might be. So I actually did a literature review of several pieces of research about how many senses humans have. And we actually have 34 as we currently understand it.
34. And so what does this mean? Like, what is because you're making an assertion here. What is the assertion that you're making? And what does that mean for the material sort of consequences of my life?
I'm making a hypothesis based on both the analogy of the observable universe and the fact that we have this expanded suite of senses to challenge you to understand that you are capable of much more than you think you are. And, you're a really good case in point for me because you love rationality and data and science, and you don't really love intuition and the unknown, the unseen. So, I think if I can convince you of anything by the end of this podcast, then the impact that could have on society, I think, is huge. I mean, the things I found out are going to shock you.
What do you mean by that?
I, as you know, was a psychiatrist in the past. So I'm able to diagnose people and say whether they have a mental illness or not. In the past 4 years, I've been keeping a secret. And there were times in that 4 years that I had to ask myself if I was in clinical depression, if I was psychotic, if I was manic, if the way that my consciousness was expanding. I mean, Steve, I've been part of teams that have locked people up and had them injected with stuff against their will because of things they were saying that's not that dissimilar to things I've experienced in the last 4 years.
So I guess we better get into the secret. Because I sat here with you almost 2 years ago now, and we had a fantastic conversation. But there was something you didn't tell my audience when we had that conversation that reached more than 20 million people. There was something at that moment in time that you didn't tell me, which was this secret you've been keeping. What is the secret, Tara?
I lost my beloved husband to leukemia almost 4 years ago. And I've written this book, which mentions my personal story. And I trust you. So I really wanted to come back on the podcast and just explain a little bit to people about what's been going on for me for the last 4 years.
So your husband, Robin, you met him 2016, and he passed away from leukemia in
2021.
2021. Now, from 2021, when he passed away, what happened in your life? What was going on in your world? If I was a fly on the wall in your context, what would I have seen?
He'd been given 2 weeks to live, but he actually lived for 3.5 weeks. And he died 2 days before our 4th wedding anniversary. So I was literally reading condolence cards on my 4th wedding anniversary. If it wasn't for the people that I have around me who became like a fortress, I don't think I would be here today. Never having had that experience before, it was just so devastating. And even though I'm a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, I just was like totally lost and broken. And then I started seeing robins in the garden every single time I went to the window, both in Hampshire and London. I've never, ever seen so many robins in my life, like not before or since. I still see them sometimes, but I noticed it. I thought, of course, that's what I want to see. I have no idea what it means, if anything. And then about 6 weeks after he passed away, I was asleep and I heard a noise in the distance, and we had been burgled once, so I went to check it wasn't the alarm in the garages. Couldn't work out what it was, thought maybe it was birds in the distance, went back to sleep. It was about 4 a.m. And then I got woken up by a massive thump to my shoulder. I wouldn't demonstrate it on you because it would be too much for me to hit you that hard. It wasn't like a tap. So I opened my eyes and I could see next to my bed a very vague, hazy version of Robin, as if he was pushing himself through treacle to be seen. And I was just transfixed. And I saw him become more and more clear. I could see the outline of his hair and his face. And then suddenly he just dissolved from the top down and my eyes went like this. And I remember seeing his shins and his feet. And I was like up on my elbow watching and I just gasped out loud. In my desperation, I did consult a couple of mediums. And again, I had that dual conversation. I said to myself, this is the kind of thing that crazy, desperate people do. And within the same breath, it's okay for me to be crazy and desperate right now. I've lost my best friend, my life partner. Like everything I thought about how the world worked has crashed around me. And I ended up not being impressed by the mediums. And just at some point, I can't even remember when now, thinking, if it's possible to communicate with someone that's passed away, and he was my husband and my best friend, and I am all about optimizing my brain and expanding my consciousness, then I should be able to do it myself. That's the start of my journey that I've written about in Signs.
And do you think you found the answer?
Yeah.
How sure are you?
100%.
I mean, if what you're saying is true, then that's a revelation, right? So many people have lost people or have gone through different types of loss in their life. And you're telling me that through the work you've done over the last couple of years and the research you've done, you understand how to communicate with them in some capacity?
Mm-hmm.
And you're 100% sure?
100%.
So listen, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to challenge you in ways that I think the viewer might challenge you sat at home.
Sure.
So I'm going to try and ask the questions that the viewer might ask,
mm-hmm.
because there's, people, this idea is quite a significant perspective shifting one. So my job in this conversation, although these are sensitive matters, of course, is just to try and play devil's advocate where I can.
And I want to say that, you know me.
Yeah, I know you.
And
yeah.
you know that you've asked me to come back on the podcast several times and I've come when I'm ready.
Yeah.
So I want you to ask me those questions.
Yeah. So where does this journey begin then? So you suffer this tragic loss in your life. You go to the mediums, you're let down by them. Where does this begin? Where does your research, your journey of discovery begin?
It starts with this decision to, try to communicate with him myself. There's a realization at some point that it's not a one-way thing, that when people pass away, they also have to learn. So it's like two people having to learn a language to speak to each other, like two people who speak a different language, having to learn a language that they can both speak. That's how it felt. Obviously, as a scientist, I then wanted to find out as much science as I could to try to back it up, which really comes down to the science of whether the mind or the psyche or the soul can exist separately from the body. Mm-hmm. And I will say that way before I even started thinking about this stuff, just the moment that he died, which he died in front of me, once he'd actually passed away, I remember a really strong feeling of looking at his body and just knowing that wasn't him. And that the essence of who he was, I didn't know where it was, but it was not there lying in that bed.
And when did you realize that you were going to start to collect research and do research on this idea of being able to communicate in ways that most people don't realize we can communicate through science? And also, when you talk about being able to communicate through these 30 plus senses, is that just with the dead or is that with each other? Like, can I communicate through, is there other ways that I can tap into these senses that you discovered through your research that will help me be more effective with the living too?
I mean, I think it starts with yourself. So I think that the fact that if you're not even aware that you've got 34 senses, then you're obviously not consciously tapping into something that you're not aware of. And some of them are non-conscious senses anyway. Things like the pH of your blood or like the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your blood. You're not going to be conscious of those. You can't necessarily exert much control over them, although obviously if you slow down your breathing or you do a certain type of breath work, it could have an impact on those things. The conclusion that I came to. So like I said, I went to the brink a few times. I went to the brink, let me give you the first example. I realised that the first anniversary was coming up on October 26th. And around, a couple of months before that, I was doing the best that I had been doing so far, but I was very aware this anniversary was coming and I wanted to prepare myself mentally. But from the 4th of October, I suddenly was in aches and pains all over my body, which actually lasted for 6 or 7 weeks and was accompanied by me feeling so depressed that I actually had to look in the mirror and go through the criteria for clinical depression and work out if I was actually depressed or not. And I didn't meet all the criteria, but I was in this physical pain. I could not understand why. I went for a massage. It was so painful, I didn't go again for a year. So eventually I looked through my diary or calendar on my phone, and I looked back to October 4th, which was the day that it started. And that was the day that I'd taken him home to die. That was the day I took him home from hospital. I didn't remember that date, but clearly my body had, and the trauma was just re-emerging as physical pain. And I only realised quite a lot later that I had to do some somatic work to actually get rid of the last bits of trauma that talking therapy can't actually get to.
Somatic work.
So body work, whether that's massage or dance or art or craniosacral therapy or Tai Chi, anything physical. Because basically there's an area in the brain, it's actually inside, so I can't really show it to you on this, but it's kind of inside there. And that part of the brain is to do with articulating speech, and it basically gets shut down by trauma. So those sort of phrases like I'm speechless or I'm dumbfounded or I have no words indicates the fact that there may be residual trauma that's held in your body that you can't actually articulate and get out and solve through talking therapy. So it requires some kind of physical therapy. So that was obviously to do with my sense of pain. And it took me a little while to kind of put together what that might mean by really tapping into why was my body manifesting pain to sort of remind me of something or show me something. But also in the first couple of weeks after Robin's body was taken away the morning after he died, and it was just under 2 weeks till the cremation. In that time, I would wake up in the morning and I would be absolutely freezing cold, shaking and shivering. And it was October, it wasn't midwinter. And I would blast up the heating. When someone else was in the house, I would realize it was like a sauna. It was actually a bit embarrassing and had to turn it down and open some windows. And Robin actually hated being cold. And he would have been in the morgue in a refrigerated drawer that whole time. And again, I think it was my sense of temperature that was kind of on the same wavelength as where I didn't consciously think of where he was, but I was feeling freezing cold. So it was, looking back, it was things like that were coincidences, absolutely. But then over time, and I'm talking a couple of years, I could ask for specific signs and get them. Sometimes at first it would take a while, and then it became it would happen that day. I could ask a question in my head and get an answer. I mentioned having, sort of, again, being at the brink of my sanity, having to question things. I was experiencing something called thought insertion, which in psychiatry is one of the symptoms of schizophrenia. It's when you have a thought in your head that you know isn't yours. So I was experiencing that really vividly. But can you imagine experiencing that and at the same time being a psychiatrist that is saying, right, Tara, you do realise you are having a psychotic symptom? And so in my research, one of the things I realised that maybe, if you're going through grief and you don't know the things that I know, you can't articulate to yourself that grief in many ways is like psychosis. It's changing the levels of neurotransmitters in your head. It's changing the electric and chemical signalling in your head. I just have so much empathy for people that have to go through that and don't have the wherewithal or the resources that I did.
Do you think one needs to cultivate their ability to see signs? Do you think it's like going to the gym?
Totally. It took me years. And like I said, I believe it took him years as well. So yeah, I say it's like learning a language, but you're right, it's like going to the gym.
And what does one need to do in that gym to grow their sign muscle?
Well, it always starts with believing, right?
Yeah. Do you think that's one of the big issues in terms of being able to access these other dimensions or dynamics is most people just don't believe in it? So I'm not even sure if I'd say most people, I'd say a lot of people don't believe in it.
Or they secretly do, but they're scared to talk about it because they think people will ridicule them.
Yeah. Because I don't know, my brain feels like I need to have the scientific evidence of things for me to accept them, because I think sometimes I worry that if I don't have scientific rigor around my beliefs, then I'm susceptible to believe anything. And I'll believe it in a spaghetti monster at the bottom of the garden, and I'll believe, every religion in the world and everything. And then I'm unanchored, and then I blow around like a plastic bag in the wind, and then I have no orientation.
Yeah.
So I think, okay, rigor is the basis of my beliefs. I have to have some sort of scientific evidence.
I know you do.
Yeah. It's not to say I'm not open-minded, because
No.
I've had my mind changed so many times in my life that one would be dumb now to not be open-minded and to not listen.
I agree with you about rigor. I completely agree with you. My entire career has been based on that. But I was pushed up against a wall, so I had to think differently. And I think the question I posed to myself is what if?
You had to think differently.
So the psychologist Carl Jung talks about, when he talks about the collective unconscious, he talks about those basically three main things that all humans experience, which is birth, life, and death. And so we have this common experience, which is actually part of our inherited gene and brain structure. So everyone who's ever lived will experience those things. But if we look at ancient wisdom, for a start, we are made of the carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen that came from the Big Bang. So we're all made of the same thing. Our ancestors lived in the cycle with nature. I think us actually having broken our connection to nature is a huge part of why we're so disconnected and unhappy. So if you think of the life cycle of a salmon, for example, it goes through its life cycle, and eventually its bones contribute to the phosphorus on the floor of the forest. So it never really goes away. In many other ways, our ancestors repeatedly saw the cycles of nature and therefore always kind of knew that everything gets renewed and nothing ever completely goes away. And I think that's a really important thing to return to. I think, when we question things, which you're absolutely right to do, I think we have to look at things that we didn't think were true, that we now know are true, as just ways of being open to the fact that things in the future might become obvious or known that aren't known now. I think that is an important place of being open-minded to sit at. And so, for example, want to hear about slime mold?
You tell me if that's something I want to hear about.
So slime mold are single-celled organisms like amoeba who go about their daily life on their own very happily as long as their basic needs are met. But if, for example, they're facing potential starvation, they will come together and form a slug, because the slug can move towards your vegetable patch, a new food source, and they can survive. Equally, if they are facing potential extinction, they will come together and form a sporing body like a mushroom. So that's got a stalk and a fruiting body that can release spores that will go into the atmosphere to all different places where these new baby organisms can grow and thrive. But if you think about it, the single cells in the stalk are sacrificing themselves for the greater good, because there's no chance that they're going to get released into the atmosphere as a spore because they're in the stalk. So some of them actually cheat and climb up the stalk to get into the fruiting body and displace other cells from the fruiting body. So things like that, and for example, the mycorrhizal network, which is how mushrooms and mycelium feed the roots of trees. Even trees that have been felled can be kept alive for centuries because the mycorrhizal network, which is the connection between mycelium and tree roots, can bring water and sugar to that tree stump to keep it alive. And trees and mycelium don't even only do it for the same species. They do it because they're part of the entire forest and its symbiotic relationship, and they care about each other. Things like this would have been thought to be fantastical 10 years ago. We're in LA at the moment, and I saw the driverless car for the first time. Now, when I was growing up watching sci-fi, I never thought I'd see that in my life. So that's all I'm saying, that, and I'm saying it from the point view of being a cognitive scientist, and I'm talking about the nature of consciousness. I'm not talking about I'm not asking you to believe, other parts of science, but based on the fact that we don't know everything. We've learnt loads of things that we thought weren't true before. I strongly believe there's a benefit to humanity of raising this kind of question and having this conversation, which I ask you why it's a taboo conversation. Why shouldn't we be enlightened? Why shouldn't we feel better? Why shouldn't we be more connected? Whatever we've been doing up until now certainly hasn't been working.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favour. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.